finishes. And during that break time, we'll be putting breakout rooms up so that you can choose which session you want to attend for the 7:35 session. You should be able to see once those breakout rooms are opened, you should be able to see a button at the bottom of your screen that indicates breakout room. And then you can choose which of the two sessions you want to go into. If for some reason you don't see the button or can't figure out how to get into one of the sessions, just hang tight in the room and I can help you get into the session that you want to get into. So that's a little bit of housekeeping for us. After we finish the third session of the evening, we're going to take everybody back into this main room. We do have raffle prizes for attendees tonight, so we will share who has won the raffle prizes before we let you go for the evening. So I am going to turn this over to Ginger Bencola. She's our prevention and wellness coordinator, and she's going to introduce the first keynote session.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us at Parent University. So like Chris was just explaining, just a reminder that our first session, our keynote session, will be 45 minutes long. We'll have some reminders as we near the end of that time. So we know we'll be wrapping up in just a couple of moments, and you'll know that you have a few more moments if there are questions you want to ask. We are going to save questions until the end of the presentation, but you can ask questions as Dr. Weiner is speaking if you'd like. You can ask all of your questions in our chat, and please make sure you are clicking on my name, Ginger Bencola, with any of your questions. I'll be collecting them throughout Dr. Weiner's talk, and then we will have Dr. Weiner answer as many as possible at the end of the session. Also, I think as Chris mentioned, we'll have an evaluation at the end of the session that we'll put in the chat for you all, and we'd love to hear your feedback. And then Chris also mentioned the raffle prizes already, so we'll announce those at the end of our night tonight. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, our keynote speaker, Dr. Erin Weiner, who will be presenting tonight's workshop, What You Need to Know About Vaping and Marijuana Teen Drug Trends in 2022. Dr. Erin Weiner is a board-certified counseling psychologist and master addiction counselor currently practicing in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. He's a national speaker, a former healthcare administrator, and the current president of the Society of Addiction Psychology. His perspectives come from his years working with veterans in the VA hospital system, directing addiction strategy for hospitals in Chicago, and his experiences in private practice. He is also a returning speaker with us here at Parent University, so we're very happy to have him back with us tonight. Dr. Weiner, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for coming. I will share my screen. There we go. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. We have so much to talk about for a subject that is unfortunately really important because what's going on right now with young people and substance use really centers around this nexus around vaping and marijuana, which also happen to be two rapidly growing industries, perhaps for the wrong reasons, but we're going to dive into a bit of that tonight. If you have questions, please feel free, as mentioned, to put them in, and we should have some time before the end to talk about it, although we will progress fairly rapidly as a result through the slides. So if you have questions we don't get to or clarifications, please feel free to drop me a line. My email is down there in the bottom left. It's Erin@weinerphd.com. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive in. And before we talk specifically about substance use, I want to set the stage, which is that right now, kids are really struggling. They're struggling with a lot of mental health problem and burden. And it's something that about half of parents, 46%, have reported that there's been some sort of problem that emerged over the course of COVID. And what we've seen when you look at literature reviews is that, like this one from the CDC, found that almost half of teenagers said that they've got persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, otherwise known as depression, and actually 1 in 5 seriously considered attempting suicide. This was moderated by how disconnected they felt to other kids in their life and at school. That's what you're seeing with these bars here on the left and right. This is how close they felt to people in person versus how much they agreed with these questions about depression. And then on the right, it's if they felt virtually connected. And so part of what this is helping us see is how these feelings of disconnection were driving a lot of this depression. We're also seeing this uptick in anxiety, which is true for adults as well. Actually, the American Psychological Association just released their new Stress in America survey that found that 1 in 4 adults right now is saying that many days they feel too stressed to even function, which is a really high percentage of people to be saying something like that. But honestly, as a practicing therapist myself, definitely jives with what I'm sensing just in terms of who I'm seeing. But in terms of young people, we're seeing something very similar, which is that when you look at all the studies that examine teenage anxiety over the past couple of years, we're seeing this 20% rate of anxiety, which is twice of what it used to be, and it's worsening over time. That's what you're seeing with these dots. The further over to the right they go, the more anxiety that they found in the sample. And it's going chronologically there as you go up the list. So you can see there's more and more anxiety over time. Now, why this is relevant to a talk on vaping and marijuana use is that essentially substance use, one of its primary roles and functions that it serves for the people who choose to use it is as a way to deal with these things. Substance use always has a purpose behind it. And for a lot of people, it's to deal with either internal tension or stress or depression, or external stress. And so what we're seeing in terms of vaping is that year over year now, as kids have gotten out from their houses and gone back to school and been more out in the community, we're seeing this 21% increase in vaping use year over year, which mirrors what we saw before the pandemic, where we saw this going up and up and up and up. We also saw this out of the National Institute of Health for young adults, which is of course, what teenagers turn into, but that marijuana use is its highest in decades, and hallucinogen use is as well. Also, not coincidentally, another industry right now that is taking off and getting a lot of venture capital dollars. But as I mentioned, this all has to do with this mental health stress burden that's being put on young people right now, either for depression or anxiety or school-related stress, which particularly in high-achieving areas like we live in, are just tremendously more than it's been for young people decades ago. But it also, and this is part of the intersection that's so challenging, it's sometimes almost like a social key in a way, where if you are not using a substance that other people are using, you're on the outside looking in, which can be very difficult if you're trying to make friends and the people, at least who you're looking at, are doing this, or if your friend group from when you were younger has migrated to this sort of behavior now that you're in high school and you're not sure if you want to do it, but it's really hard not to, and all of your friends are doing that. And when you look at how the high school years are really in many ways driven by identity formation and figuring out who you are and who the people you want around you are, that becomes really, really tricky to navigate. And so this all leads to, by kids' senior years, 70% have tried alcohol, about half have used some illegal substance, 40% will have used nicotine, 1 in 5 will have used a prescription. And this is what feeds into about 1 in 10 people in the general population having a diagnosable addiction or substance use disorder. 90% of people who have any addiction problem in their life start when they're young, which is part of why young people are in the crosshairs of the industries that are driving these two trends. And that's what we're going to dive into right now. So to understand where we are, it's important to take just a second and look at the history about how we got here in terms of vaping, nicotine, and in terms of THC, marijuana use. So let's just start with the basics of what a vape is. And essentially, it's a device that's used to heat a substance and release a chemical. So the reason why I'm phrasing it this way is that you have to release a chemical from the substance that you're taking somehow, or you can't absorb it. So you could say, for example, eat it and it's broken down in the stomach and absorbed there. You could smoke it, where you light it on fire and the combustion releases the chemical and it's absorbed through the lungs. And vaping is basically, the idea behind it was, well, let's superheat the substance to the point that it releases the chemical, but below that point of combustion. Because whenever you light something on fire, it tends to be not as good for you. That's why you're not supposed to eat burned barbecue or burnt toast. Burned things create carcinogens. And so the thought is, well, let's just superheat it and that'll be at least marginally better. And I guess, spoiler alert, it is, but that doesn't mean that it's not harmful. There's actually still thousands of chemicals, including many toxic ones in there. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But that's basically the idea behind vaping. And they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. What we saw at first were cartridge-based vapes. These are very popular. Juul, which is what's pictured here, was probably the most popular. There are also tank or mod-based systems, which basically you buy the liquid and you refill a tank over and over and over. And then what's most popular right now with kids are disposables, which are ones where instead of replacing the cartridge, or cart for short, which you can see at the end of the Juuls there, you're just throwing out the whole device. They're meant to be thrown away. And this particularly for young people who are not by law allowed to have them, that makes it very easy to get rid of them in a pinch if need be, because you'd have to throw it away soon anyway, because the device itself isn't what's valuable. They cost, $10, maybe $11 each. And then on the THC and cannabis side, there's a huge range of how they can look. And to be honest with you, you can even modify a nicotine vape to accept a THC cartridge. So it's actually very difficult to know exactly what a young person is using unless you test it, or unless they tell you, or unless it's very, very obvious. But again, unless you know the difference in what it looks like, it's going to be very hard to tell. So getting back to nicotine for a second here, Juul really was the driver for a lot of what happened with young adults and adolescents using e-cigarettes at very high rates. And their market value is taking off in the years here, 2016 to 2018, when other e-cigarette brands were really languishing down the bottom of the barrel. And the reason for this is they designed at that time a very innovative new way of delivering a stronger nicotine hit to the brain than even regular cigarettes by mixing the nicotine with benzoic acid. They call them nicotine salts. And this, of course, means that if you're delivering an even stronger hit than cigarettes, that means it's going to even more quickly grab the adolescent mind than a cigarette would, and certainly a lot more than the first e-cigarettes did. And so when then you look here in 2018 and you see things like Juul saying that they don't want kids to use, but then 16 out of 17 people who uses their device is a teenager, these things don't seem to match up. And, as we've been finding as we look at the documents coming out, again, it was definitely on purpose. This was very much planned. One of the key drivers for why young people vape and continue to vape are flavors. And flavors are something that we've known for ages is a really foundational way that nicotine companies indoctrinate kids into using nicotine. That's why no one's seen these for about 13 years now, because they were banned in 2009, flavored cigarettes. That's because we know that they're attractive to kids. So when you see these companies turning around and then selling your mango vapes and your blueberry ice vapes and pineapple, and then candy flavors like Rainbow Crunch and cotton candy, it's very clear what's going on here. The statistics tell us that 85% of young people say that they vape for the flavors. And when you look at surveys of what they prefer fruit or menthol or mint and candy or dessert. And their least favorite flavor is other, which is code for tobacco. Tobacco is other. And so when you're asking yourself, so is this really being used for smoking cessation? Well, if you're moving over from like Marlboro or something like that, you could probably tolerate a tobacco flavored vape. Whereas young people are not going to be very interested in that, which begs the question of why are they being flavored and then marketed this way? And so these are pictures from Juul's launch campaign. And when you look at these models, they do not look like 55-year-old chain smokers who desperately want to quit. And that's why they've lost a bunch of lawsuits. It's because, it's very clear the demographic that they're going for. And this is something that we've seen over and over throughout history, most recently with big tobacco. The Master Settlement Agreement mandated that they release a lot of their internal documents. And we saw quotes like, today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer, and that we have to attract new smokers and develop them. Altria, by the way, which is the company that owns Marlboro, has invested very heavily in cannabis stock and cannabis companies. More on that in a minute. We also saw the same thing from Camel, where they're very clear that they're targeting 14 to 18-year-olds, and we need to build a new brand in this market. And they know that being seen as cool and edgy and rebellious is how you get young people to want your product, which is why Joe Camel existed, because that is what it meant to be young, edgy, and rebellious at the time when Joe Camel came out, and why they haven't been allowed to use him for years. And this has tremendous implications, because if you've got 2.5 million teens who are vaping right now, if we look at smoking data, which is what we have because vaping is still relatively new, all things considered, it's really, really hard to quit. A lot of people make attempts every year and very few succeed. And although younger people are a little more successful, you can see that's about a 10% success rate. 1 in 10 young people are able to quit. 40% of smokers are never able to quit ever. And so of those 39% of smokers who are never able to quit, if you are smoking at the time of your death, there's a 2/3 chance that smoking is what killed you. And so if this trend holds, 2.5 million smokers would mean 650,000 million would eventually die from smoking later in life. And this is something that is absolutely preventable, right? You subtract smoking, who knows how much longer these people would have lived. And so we'll see how this tracks with vaping. We don't have the data on this yet because vaping's really only emerged in the past decade or so. But worth mentioning as well that teens who vape are about 4 times more likely to start smoking than those that don't. So again, this, in terms of the track that they get on, this doesn't portend very well. Now, in terms of what we know about vaping and health in general, I'm going to draw here from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. We know that vaping is addictive through the nicotine that's inside of it. We know that it includes numerous toxic substances other than nicotine, that the aerosol contains heavy metals, and that different components of vaping have different levels of toxins because it's not well regulated. The type of liquid that you're using has different levels of toxins, the vape pen that you're using, and then even how you use the vape pen matters, because a lot of them allow you to adjust the electrical resistance in the heating coil, which if you overheat it means that the coil can flake, and then you can end up inhaling parts of that. We also know that vaping aerosol causes DNA mutagenesis, and DNA mutagenesis is the thing that causes cancer. So while we don't have the same link between vaping and cancer as we do between smoking and cancer, we know that vaping causes the thing that causes cancer. So it's really only a matter of time before we get the data that more clearly links them in a direct sort of way. It's also worth mentioning, you'll notice here that I used the word aerosol. That's because vaping is one of these somewhat misleading terms, which is done on purpose because vaping sounds like water vapor. It kind of alludes to this idea of water, which sounds natural and harmless and not a big deal. Vapor is not what comes out of these devices. It is a chemical aerosol, particles of chemicals suspended in air. That's what you're taking in, and that's why aerosoling doesn't have quite the same ring to it. Now, there are a lot of chemicals in here. A lot of them are toxic. Berkeley Lab found 31 of them, including formaldehyde, of both cigarette and preserved frog fame. And here's some of the carcinogens. You may wonder why there's all these chemicals in there that kids, for whatever reason, don't think that they're inhaling. And these things come from what's called pyrolysis, P-Y-R-O-L-S-I-S, pyrolysis, or the degradation of a chemical under heat or flame. And so what happens when you superheat these substances is they break down into a bunch of stuff. Formaldehyde, for example, isn't on the ingredients list because it's what's created when you superheat propylene glycol, which is one of the liquid bases of virtually all e-cigarette liquid. So no, that wouldn't be written on the ingredients list, but yes, absolutely, you're inhaling it into your lungs, along with a bunch of other stuff. This study came out this year in the Chemical Research and Toxicology Journal, and they were looking at basically by molecular weight all of the different chemicals in vape aerosol. And what I found was, depending on the brand, there's between 1,000 and 2,000 different chemicals in vape aerosol, including everything in that box there has a lot of features that look very similar to known carcinogens. Most of these chemicals, by the way, don't have a name. Well, we don't know what they are. There's just bunches of unknown chemicals, but those have a structure that looks like a carcinogen. These ones have structures that look like lipids or oils, which matters a lot because oil-like substances are what caused that E-Valley outbreak. If you recall, right before COVID hit, there were a bunch of young adults and teenagers being hospitalized. About, I think 80 died from major lung problems from vaping, which were caused essentially by oil in the lungs. So those types of chemicals are very concerning. So really, like when you compare this, so this is not harmless, right? This is not just like flavoring and water vapor. There's a bunch of chemicals going into your lungs. Really, the only reason why you would ever choose to do this to yourself that has much logic behind it is if you were already smoking, because although there's 1,000 to 2,000 chemicals that you get in every inhalation off of a vape, there are 7,000 chemicals that you get when you smoke a cigarette. So that's really the main benefit here, is if you are switching from cigarettes, you are getting fewer chemicals and no tar because you're not burning anything. The secondhand aerosols also have fewer chemicals than secondhand smoke. Completely substituting it out is less harmful, but doing both is actually worse than either one on its own. So if someone's both vaping and smoking, the evidence on that shows that it's actually worse, particularly for your cardiovascular health, than doing either one of them on its own. There's some evidence that smokers could use these potentially to stop smoking, but there's some pitfalls there. So it's kind of, I'd say, more of a case-by-case basis. For example, you can't smoke indoors, where it's much more easy for someone to vape indoors, keep it right by their bed, hide it, use it in school, as a lot of school administrators know, etc. So if someone's not already poisoning themselves essentially by smoking, vaping is actively harmful to health. Less harmful also does not mean safer. And that's another word that I very much encourage you to edge away from, is using the word safe in terms of vapes and vaping. It's not safe. It's just less harmful. You're definitely still doing damage to yourself. It's just a question of degree. So if you are, say, inside of a developing body, or you care about your lung health and cardiovascular health, or don't want to get cancer, less harmful doesn't mean safe. You're still putting lots of poisons in there, and it looks like pretty clearly some carcinogens. So in terms of the long-term impact of kids vaping nicotine, it disrupts serotonin signaling and limbic system development in the brain. So those are a couple of structural and chemical systems in the brain, can lead to reduced attention span, more impulsivity, enhanced anxiety and fear, depressive symptoms in adulthood. And it's correlated with being more likely to use other drugs. Worth mentioning on that one, actually, that nicotine and THC are actually the two chemicals that we've identified do prime the brain to be more receptive to the positive influence of other substances. So we're going to talk more in a couple minutes about what does it mean to be a gateway drug, but from a chemical standpoint, that's what it means to be a gateway drug. It primes your brain to be more receptive to those other substances. We know it's also correlated with more high-risk sexual behavior and psychiatric disorders. So what keeps us here? This is going to be a common theme throughout this presentation tonight is money, and specifically how you can make money off of young people. Because that, again, if 90% of addiction starts when you're young, it very much behooves you to target that market, because then you're getting customers who are going to stick around for a long time. So we're going to pivot now, and we're going to do it through a link, actually. On this slide, I know we've been moving through this fast, and thank you guys for following along. I know I'm speaking really rapidly tonight, just so much to get through. But you might have noticed that it says the makers of PAX invite you to the Juul launch party. And that's important because PAX, the people who made Juul, are actually a marijuana, THC vape company. And if you look at the PAX era, it looks a lot like the Juul, and that's not an accident. So much of this, again, is very much on purpose. So I want to talk now about why cannabis is a particularly bad idea for kids. And I want to start by defining terms here, because you'll hear me jump around between saying cannabis, marijuana, and THC as we go through this section tonight. And I think it's important also, just for everybody's benefit to know what these things refer to, because there's definitely some confusion out there. And like so many things we're talking about tonight, it is on purpose. So cannabis is an umbrella term that covers a bunch of different types of plants in the cannabis family. And one of those plants is called hemp. Hemp is federally legal, and it's where you get CBD or cannabidiol from. By definition, hemp has less than 0.3% THC, which is the chemical part of marijuana that's addictive and that gets you high. But CBD is basically like it's kind of an anti-inflammatory in some cases. That's a whole nother talk if we want to have it sometime about what CBD is and isn't. But the bottom line is that it's not addictive, it doesn't get you high, and it's probably not going to hurt you. But marijuana is something different. Marijuana is a cannabis plant that has generally low CBD, but generally high THC, the component again that gets you high. So when we're talking about hemp versus marijuana, that's what we're referring to. Cannabis is an umbrella term which has both. And part of what you've seen is the marijuana market has been trying to rebrand itself to have a broader appeal. And the word cannabis is in more, you probably, if you just think of like, what do I associate with that term? It leans a little bit more into this idea of health and wellness products. And that's part of why you see them really push into that, even though the laws are called recreational marijuana or medical marijuana. And even the large groups that the industry funds to work to change laws on this nationwide, like the Marijuana Policy Project and NORML, they all have marijuana in the name. That's the difference between cannabis, marijuana, and THC, which is a cannabinoid, a constituent part. So, all right, past terms, let's dive in. There is an increased risk for addiction with young people specifically using this product. First off, yes, THC is addictive. There's a lot of confusion about this, but we've known this for years. Here's a couple of journal articles about it. Here's a picture of my DSM-5 TR, which is like the psychiatric Bible, essentially, with cannabis use disorder in there. I think there's confusion about this because marijuana, THC, it is addictive like alcohol is addictive in that one, most people don't get addicted to it who use it, but that doesn't mean that it's not addictive. I think that a lot of people just use their own anecdotal experience and are like, oh, like I used it and I didn't get addicted to it, or I know someone who used it and they didn't get addicted to it. Doesn't mean it's not addictive. It's actually the second most common substance that we treat in rehab programs. And young people are actually more prone to develop an addiction to this. What the statistics tell us is about 1 in 10 users has an addiction. And for kids, it's about 1 in 6. And between 1/4 to 1/2 of those who smoke or vape it every single day have an addiction to it. So kids have an increased risk for addiction. They're extra vulnerable. Second, this isn't Woodstock pot anymore. This is a much stronger product. And what we found is that the higher the content of THC, the more harmful it tends to be. So as the commercial industry has picked up year after year after year, what you've started to see is the relative potency of THC in marijuana products go up and up and up and up. Back in the 60s and 70s, it was about 3 to 4% THC in marijuana flower, which is what is smoked. And it stayed there until about the mid-90s. But by the end of the 2010s, it was up to about 16%. And it's even higher now. This is a study that came out in 2020 looking at what potency is available in state legalized markets. And what they found was basically nothing is available under 15%, very little is available that's under 15% THC these days. Most of it's over. And they found that states that have just a medical program, their average is 19.2%, and states like ours that have a recreational program jumps up to 21.5%. And I should mention that there's actually no difference between medical and recreational marijuana, just like there's no difference between like medicinal Percocet and fun Percocet. It's all hydromorphone, you know, like it's all the same, or it's all, or that's actually oxycodone, but it's all the same stuff. It's not like there's any actual difference. Some places though have different offerings, which is why the percentage is different. Here, of course, in Illinois, the only difference is how much you pay in taxes. So 1 joint of today's marijuana here in Illinois is basically like lighting up 7 joints from the mid-90s and smoking them all at the same time. And the extracts that are being vaped, so if you hear someone talking about dabbing or using concentrates, wax, shatter, butter, there's a lot of nicknames for it. All that stuff is very potent, like 60, 70, 80, even over 90% pure THC. If you're interested in knowing exactly what's being sold, highly recommend just pull up a dispensary's website. They will show you the whole menu on there, and you can see how it's marketed using names that appeal to young people and how the percentages are very high. I think I've got a screenshot from our local dispensaries around here in a few slides, but it's a lot stronger than it used to be. We know that it's linked to a lot of negative academic and vocational outcomes. So just again, very briefly, we know that includes lower grades, higher dropout rates, more disciplinary problems. This could be due to its impact on the brain, that's the cognitive part, but it also could be social or both. So what I mean by social or functional is that if you are a young person who's getting high for fun, you are generally also hanging out with other kids who get high for fun. And that means those are probably not the same kids who are at the library late studying for a history test on a Thursday night. You're self-selecting yourself into a group of people who's not going to be achieving at the highest level, which means that you probably aren't either. Now, it doesn't mean for a fact that that's the case. There's obviously a normal distribution of how everybody performs on these sorts of things, but it's not giving yourself the best chance at success. The earlier, the younger that someone starts to use these products, the worse off it ends up being. And the more often they use it, the worse that it ends off being. In college, we basically see the same trend. There's increased chance to skip class, lower GPA, longer time to graduate, and this all rolled into decreased lifetime earning potential the more THC that a young person uses. Now, this was really well demonstrated in a study that came out just this year that was looking longitudinally at what happened when in their adolescence, young adults were, or when someone was an adolescent, they were using marijuana frequently versus not at all. And you can see that here in this category for a bunch of different outcomes. And just to sum up what this table says, it found that it was significantly related, the smoking THC or using THC products, significantly related to the development of psychosis, which we'll talk more about in just a second, developing problematic substance use, so developing an addiction, very significant to delinquency, having more debt, having lower general well-being, feeling like you're being excluded socially from other groups of people, and very significantly related to both not being in school and being unemployed at the same time. Highly related to all those things. So again, and even actually for frequent versus occasional use, there was a pretty significant jump there. So frequent use in particular has very significant outcomes on what happens with young adults over time if they start this again when they're adolescents. So it also actually affects literally the physical shape of the brain and how the brain works. And for sake of time, we're not going to dive too far into that right now. But the long story short is that it's very different, the implications on the brain if someone's using THC over the age of 25 or 30 versus under the age of 25 or 30, before your brain is done growing in some places and pruning in others. And we know from numerous brain scans and studies that it actually physically affects the way the brain develops. You could call it brain damage if you want to, but damage usually means like you're coming in there like TI style and breaking something. This is more just, it creates malformations in how the brain is supposed to develop. Not good stuff. There are implications then on the way the brain functions in a number of different cognitive domains. Not a good thing for young people to do if they value their health in that way. We know that it impairs judgment when you're high, leading to that increased risky sexual behavior I mentioned before. We also know that it pretty clearly leads to kids having psychotic breaks, and that this is directly related to the percentage of THC that someone consumes. There's been so much written on this subject, and this is one of those issues that the marijuana industry in particular does not like to talk about, or when it is talked about, they'll be like, oh, moral panic, or oh, it's reefer madness all over again. But that's not what this is. This is peer-reviewed research that's been replicated over and over and over and over again. This study that I've cited here that made national news a couple of years ago, looking at sites all across Europe, it found that today's high-potency flower products lead to a 50% greater chance that someone is going to have a first-time psychotic break. And if someone is dabbing using those really high potency concentrates, it goes up by 5 times. There's a 5 times greater chance that a young person is going to have a psychotic break. Now, I've seen this firsthand in my private practice that I'm in now, and also when I was an administrator at a hospital system. We had a patient psychiatric program for kids that had about 40 beds, and there were always kids in there, usually like somewhere between 2 and 5, that had these psychotic breaks. But even with that perspective, I was really surprised to see the numbers in this study that came out a couple months ago. It was looking specifically at cannabis-induced psychotic breaks. It was using data from 2017, and actually their central question was, does marijuana legalization lead to there being more psychotic breaks due to marijuana in state? And the answer, spoiler alert, is yes, it does. So, we've got that going on right now in our state. But what really stuck out to me was the number of these hospitalizations in 2017, which was 129,000 in 1 year. That comes out to 1 person every 4 minutes in our country being hospitalized for a marijuana or cannabis-induced psychotic break. That is a lot of people. That is a lot of people. And as the use has continued to expand over the past 5 years since this data was collected, I guarantee you that number is even higher now. So this is very much a risk. We could talk for a lot longer about this just in particular, but again, the concentrates in particular have the worst outcomes with this. The majority of kids we see coming in with this problem have been using vape pens and have been using the concentrates as opposed to the flower. Drug driving is also a huge issue with THC. Just anecdotally, the assistant principals that I talked to, their local data seems to say that kids are about 4 times more likely to drive high than to drive drunk, which is a huge problem because it is very unsafe to drive high. A quick word about this and why it's so challenging is that THC does not act in the blood the same way that alcohol does. For alcohol, your blood alcohol content is directly related to how well you drive. THC does not work that way. It's this pink line over time in this graph. What it does is it goes into your blood and then shoots out within about 3 or 4 hours. And that's because THC is highly lipophilic. It's attracted to fat. Your brain is 70% fat, so it shoots out of your blood and into your brain where it still affects you for a lot longer period of time, which is why when you see the subjective high here, it is not at 0 when the THC in the blood is at 0. And the performance on motor tasks also has not rebounded. We are not going to read this slide because there's bunches of technical stuff on here, but here's a list of all of the cognitive ways that cannabis, THC in particular, impairs you. And here are functional ways that it impairs you while you drive. There is so much information on this. I think you have a copy of these slides, by the way, and if not, again, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to provide them. But it is not safe to drive high, just full stop. Now, there's also an issue for young people about how this is marketed. And similar to what we talked about with nicotine just a minute ago, we're seeing the same thing happen, but in slightly different ways with THC products. This picture in particular is actually from an Illinois dispensary. And if you ask yourself, like, who is into the pot lollipops and the candy bars and the chocolate bars, like what market is this pointed at? It doesn't take a rocket scientist. Here's how they're named. Again, this is just, I screenshotted this right off of a local dispensary, one of our dispensary's websites. You can see they're named things like Brownie Scout, banana cookies with THC content, like this is 26, 18 and 19, a little bit lower, 24. I was just actually on their website the other day. They had a 31% potent flower. And here are the extracts, which again, I just pulled this off the front page. I wasn't like filtering by the strongest. You will find stronger ones, but here's Pineapple Muffin at 66 and 71%, and Magic Melon is at 70. So you could name this stuff anything, right? Like you could name it whatever you want. And advertising and product names, they're always on purpose. They're very carefully thought out to appeal to the type of person they think will read that and be like, that sounds like something that I want to buy. And this is something that's very well documented. There was actually a study that came out earlier this year showing how systematically cannabis companies, recreational cannabis companies, use marketing that appeals to adolescents. Just a couple of examples from, again, our local community around here that I noticed. This was one a couple of years back where the dispensary is handing out their swag at Buffalo Grove Days. This is Zen Leaf. I believe this was actually Northbrook, where they had a raccoon as a mascot. This was particularly, it was against the law because you're not allowed to use animals, but it was particularly an egregious violation because they're right down the street from Ravinia Elementary School, which has a raccoon as its mascot. So this is the sort of stuff that we see over and over and over again. And what it ends up doing, though, is it's been driving this change where you've got, over time, the perceived harmfulness of marijuana has been dropping while the product has been getting objectively more and more and more harmful over time. That's been, I'd say, probably the biggest coup of the industry, is that they've been able to pull this off while they've been making these stronger and stronger and more harmful products. And the reason why they care so much about that messaging is that there's a very clear link between whether or not someone thinks a drug is risky and whether or not they use it. So this is data looking at national data looking at the risk of binge drinking and using marijuana. If you either perceive there to be a great risk, that's the dark bar, or if you don't perceive there to be a great risk. And you can see that for drinking, you are twice as likely to drink as a teenager if you don't think it's a big deal. And you are 15 times more likely to use marijuana as a teenager if you don't think it's a big deal. So very much in the interest of these industries to target the young, in part because that also tends to be where they gain the most traction. So again, if you look at marijuana users by age, there's that big drop off after 29 years of age. And as someone in the industry, that's about a 50% potential profit loss. So what you want is you want this bar to be as high as it possibly can be, because there's a certain percentage of people who naturally age out of it. You want to catch as many of those young people as you can and keep them with you for as long as you can. Now, I do want to take a quick second and talk about how being a gateway drug factors into all of this, because this is another one of those issues like the addictive potential where people say there's a debate, but there's really not a debate. You ask anybody in addiction treatment, they will tell you absolutely it's a gateway drug. And I want to explain to you why, beyond just that chemical priming that I talked about a few minutes ago. So this is data looking at the chances that you're using another illicit drug other than marijuana if you've used marijuana as a teenager in the last month. And you can see that that chance here is 10 times higher. This is a longitudinal study that looked at the chances that someone develops a new addiction to prescription pain pills if they are using marijuana recreationally. And the odds ratio for occasional use goes up to 3 times, and then about 5 times, 4.5 times, if they're frequently or very frequently using. Again, longitudinal study. Here's another one that was looking at a young adult urban cohort and what they did earlier in life and their chances of developing a new addiction to opioids or heroin. And you can see here, here's the low and non-user category, and here's the frequent use during adolescent category. Here, by the way, is the limited use during adolescent category, which itself is still about, what, like 4 to 5 times more likely to use heroin, or again, longitudinal over time, and about twice as likely to develop an addiction to any opioid. And this all plays into this idea and the fact that the vast majority of people, 92% who use heroin at some point prior to that, used marijuana. And so the reason for this is that if you have a young person who's never used a drug before in their life and someone approaches them with a bag of marijuana and says, hey, do you want to tie off and inject this? They're going to say no, right? That's a really tough sell, never going to work because they've never used drugs before and they think that's risky. But now imagine if it's a friend walking up and says, hey, I've got some weed. You want to smoke with me? Or, hey, I've got a vape pen. I've got some I've got THC. I've got a weed cart, whatever you want to call it. You want to use this. And then the child's thinking, well, like, isn't everybody doing it? It's legal now anyway. Isn't it medicine for there's all of these tropes that have gotten into their head. They're much more likely to do that. And that's reflected in the percentages of young people who use these products. But then now they're starting to shift a little bit, both in terms of their own identity, as now there's someone who gets high for fun. They're hanging out with people who get high for fun. They can see themselves now as someone who breaks the law when they want to, because that's what they're doing when they're obtaining and using these substances. And so that creates a permission structure and an opening for when they're hanging out with these people, and then all of a sudden there's a line of cocaine, or there's some mushrooms, or there's some Percocet, to reference that from before. Now all of a sudden they're more likely than they were before to try that. And that's what eventually leads people to using stronger and stronger things, because once you've taken Percocet, it's easier to imagine using heroin, although people usually snort it to start before they inject it. And it's all about lowering the perceived risk. Nobody starts with methamphetamine, nobody starts with heroin or looking for fentanyl on the street. It's not how it works. You start with something that you don't think is as risky, and then you move your identity slowly in that direction. If you think about it this way, if those really intense drugs that can kill you really quickly are like step 4, you first have to take step 1 and then step 2 and step 3 to get to step 4. If you never take step 1, you're probably not going to make it to step 4. And that's ultimately how all of this ends up working together. And so when you can see all of these forces at play, and then you've got kids telling us, and so this directly applies to us here in Illinois, that if marijuana is legalized in their state, 1 in 4 high school seniors say they're either more willing to try it, or they're going to start using more than they did before. That really matters. And that's, for those of us in the prevention world, something we've been trying to cope with and educate on now for the past 3 years. And to bring this all back together before we pivot very quickly through the last segment here, thanks again for dealing with my used car salesman impression. This study that came out found the kids who vape nicotine are 3.5 times more likely to either be using marijuana right now or to have used it in the past. So what can we do? What can we do as parents, as caring adults? Again, I'm going to go quickly through this, and I apologize for the brevity, but I want to make sure that we have this information out there. The first and most important thing you can do is stay connected to your child and know the signs of use. The stay connected aspect means know your kid, because if you don't know what normal is, you're not going to know when it changes. So you've got to have a baseline. You've got to be interested. You've got to be connected. Now, in terms of signs of use, things to watch for, oftentimes if someone is struggling and is using often, you're going to see changes in school functioning, like truancy or missed appointments and homework, fewer extracurriculars. For the peer group, their old friends may fade away, particularly if those old friends are not also using the drugs. They may have new friends, but you've never met them, almost like your child doesn't want you to meet them. And if you look at their social media, you're going to start seeing them and their friends, and you can sometimes just look like, what are they following? How are they posting? The vast majority of young drug deals that occur for young people that aren't done like in person at school are done through social media, particularly Snapchat, particularly Instagram. Family dynamics also start to get very strained. They might be avoiding you more. They might be moody. They might break curfew. You may also start to see changes in how they look. So a decline in hygiene, burns on their fingers or lips, having either dilated or red eyes, wearing long sleeves, even in warm weather, can help with concealing vape pens. Wardrobe changes, if it seems like they're trying to identify with a subculture that's very closely linked to drug use, take note of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing drugs as well, but it's absolutely worth noting. And if they either have too much or too little money, that may also be a sign that they're either buying drugs or they're selling them, which is a lot more common than people think it is. There's a lot of high schoolers who basically have someone older buy nicotine products or THC products and then resell them in school at an upcharge. Secreted phone calls that they're like running off to do or spending a lot of time alone, changes in sleep habits or energy, often asking to go to the bathroom, having the munchies or sudden appetite is a very common side effect of THC. Or if you smell anything unusual, or it seems like they're trying to smell a certain way so you don't smell something unusual, those are all important signs to watch for. So you want to know the signs of use. You also want to make sure that you're safe to talk to, including about difficulties or failures, because if you are not safe to talk to, your child is not going to talk to you about the things that really matter. So really quick overview on a model you can use. It's the LOVE model. Quick disclaimer, I did not make this up. It's just a really good model. Love stands for listening, offering, validating, and empathizing. So first, make sure to listen to your child. Seek first to understand, then be understood, to quote Stephen Covey. But you want to make sure that you're taking the time to really understand what they're saying to you. You can demonstrate this active listening through open-ended questions. These are questions that generally start with things like, tell me more about, or how. Sometimes why, although you got to be careful with why, because that sometimes can sound like accusatory, like, why do you feel that way? But that's like the difference between saying, like, how was your day at school? Or was your day at school good? Yes. Versus, what was the most interesting thing that happened at school today? Or what was the most challenging thing that happened at school today? Reflections also show that you're listening when you take in information and then you reflect it back to the person speaking to you in different words. It shows that you heard them, that you understood them, and that you're paying attention. The O of love stands for offering. So specifically offering feedback in a way that doesn't create pushback, because a lot of times parents can be kind of pushy with advice, or like, here's what you need to do. And if you don't push, people can't push back. So the way to do a feedback sandwich, which is how you don't push, is first you ask permission to share how you feel. So you can say, like, I've been through something like this. Can I tell you about how it went for me? And then when they say yes, they're actively asking for the advice, which softens it. It's not like you're just putting it on them. They've said, yes, please tell me. Then you give the advice, and then you ask for how they feel about it. You could even explicitly invite them to disagree. So then after all of that, they've asked for advice and they've had a chance to decide if they like it. It makes them far more likely to use it than if you just put it on them. The V stands for validating, making sure that you tell your child that their feelings are okay to have, which is something that very, again, easy not to do or to dismiss, like, oh, that's not such a big deal. It's a big deal to them. And like, validate it, be there with them, then pivot. And validating is very closely related to empathizing. To borrow a phrase from Brene Brown, get into a dark hole with somebody and be with them. Don't just like ride in like a white knight and try to show them the way out. People like to be together in a problem oftentimes rather than just rescued. That also helps them feel better about it later. If you don't have a particularly emotionally close relationship with your child, though, have persistence, don't get discouraged if it doesn't work at first. Safety is not something that you can tell someone. You can't be like, I'm safe, you can tell me anything. It doesn't work that way. You have to show them that you're safe over and over and over again with consistency. So if that's not something that you have, give it some time, stay persistent. And remember that a young person, their behaviors, everyone's behaviors always have a purpose. If someone's doing something that seems counterproductive, like say vaping, that means that they're getting something out of it that's more important to them than the punishment or the fighting or anything else. And it's really important to understand why, to be able to actually get in there and eventually change it. So I know I'm almost out of time, so we might have forfeited our time at a Q&A. So I'm just going to go really quickly through these last bits. If we can have a couple more minutes, that'd be amazing. And if not, I understand. Emphasize healthy connections at home. This helps promote general well-being and better coping. Ways you can do that: social connectivity, get them out from behind their screen, and ideally also interacting with you as a family, including, I know, hard to imagine, maybe even do what they like to do, like playing video games or going where they like to be. Don't just make them come to you. On the behavioral side, helping people understand how their actions connect to their feelings is really important. If you avoid things you're anxious about, you're going to feel more anxious over time. If you're depressed and you isolate, you're going to feel more depressed. So a lot more we could talk about there, but ultimately having people understand their behaviors is important, and their emotions. You've got to be able to understand and speak your emotions to process through them. There are ways that you can help build that with young people. You also want to promote that development of healthy coping behaviors really quickly. That can be just physical health, like sleep, exercise, nutrition, screen time limits. I know we're going quickly, but these things really matter. If you have a young person who's staying up on social media all night on their phone and getting like 4 hours of sleep a night, that's going to impact their mental health. And that's something definitely, again, a whole nother topic to talk about, but I know we're going quickly, but this stuff really matters. Meditation can be really helpful for everybody, including kids and teenagers. There's a lot of great smartphone apps that you can use to help teach that. More on that if you're interested. Talking through emotions and problems is a great way to feel better and also models healthy coping that they can then use for the rest of their life. And if they're really struggling, talk to a therapist. We don't bite, I promise. It doesn't mean you're like a bad parent or anything. If you have a child who's struggling, I think a lot of times parents feel like it's some sort of referendum on them. If you have to go to a therapist, it's really not how it works. We've trained for years to know how to help, and we're absolutely worth calling on if your child has a problem and it seems like they're either not getting better, or if you're looking at their trajectory over time, they're getting worse. If you have a child who's acting out, you need to have consistent boundaries and limits around that behavior. You can't just be waffly about it or let them walk all over you because they get angry. It's something I see a lot too. That said, you can't just punish your way out of this oftentimes. You need to reward the behavior you want to see happen over and over again. So what do you want them to do? Positive reinforcements are actually just as important, if not even more so, than avoiding negative behavior. Have access to phones and mobile devices. Again, we could probably talk for 2 hours just about that, but long story short, there's a lot of pitfalls and just straight dangers that exist on the internet and on phones. So important to be monitoring and shepherding your child through that environment, because there's a lot of harms and honestly a lot of predators. Be on the same page as your parenting partner to be consistent if you have one, and make sure to take care of yourself and your marriage if you're partnered. Household leaders set the tone for the rest of the house. If your health suffers, your kids' health suffer. So don't go to like a martyr place where like being a good parent means giving everything to my kids. Model what taking care of yourself looks like. Then your kids will take care of themselves when they get older too. So to sum everything up, vaping and marijuana, chronically misunderstood. It's not an accident. There are really powerful economic forces at work here that have lobbyists full-time trying to push this forward and grow businesses. And it's really on us as the people who care about youth to talk out the full story so that they're not sucked in. From a health perspective, nobody should be vaping if they're not already smoking, period. And kids shouldn't be doing either one. There's heavy metals, there's carcinogens, there's toxins. THC and marijuana are also far from benign. They are particularly harmful for youth, particularly to the developing brain in a lot of ways. And these products can be vaped, which is what is unfortunately very popular amongst young people and delivers the most harmful concentrated product. And as a parent, the best thing that you can do, stay connected to your child, be an emotionally safe rock to them, and be there so that if they're struggling, they will tell you about it, and you can help them either build coping skills at home or find a professional to do that with you. So thank you guys. I know I'm talking a mile a minute. I appreciate your time and attention and for letting me go a couple minutes over. Again, if you'd like to get in touch, feel free to drop me a line, visit me on social media. I tend to be very responsive. So I don't know if we have time for a couple questions, but if we do, I'm happy to take them. And if not, happy to chat over email.
Dr. Weiner, thank you so much for that incredibly informative presentation. You must be out of breath from sharing all of that information with us. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions. I know a few folks did submit questions. I think if you would like to get in touch with Dr. Weiner directly, I just want to emphasize what he just said, that he is incredibly responsive and would be happy to answer questions. I think by email. You are also welcome to reach out to myself and our OPRF team with additional questions. But for right now, we are going to kick it back over to Chris Johnson and get ready for our second session. So thank you again, Dr. Weiner, and thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. Over to you, Chris.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you, Dr. Weiner, for that very informative presentation. We are going to try to stay on time tonight. So you should see on the screen in front of you our first round of breakout rooms, session 2, running from 7:35 to 8:20. Take a few minutes to take a look at the topics. What we're going to do is in about 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to open up the breakout rooms for these 2 sessions. And then you'll have the option to choose between either this first session or the second session. So we're going to give you a couple minutes to take a break. And then, like I said, in just a couple minutes, I will open up the breakout rooms for you. a reminder too, to fill out our evaluation form. We dropped it in the chat. Please fill out, take a few minutes to fill out the form. We really like your feedback, and it helps us plan for programming for future parent universities. We are asking that you fill out an evaluation for each session that you attend. So we will drop that link. The moderators in your breakout rooms will drop that link into the chat in your breakout room. But we appreciate all the feedback we can get. It helps us come up with planning and ideas for topics for next spring's parent university. And I am going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. If you have trouble getting into a room, just stay in, you're still in the main room with me. I will help you get into the breakout room that you want to go into. So please feel free to jump into one of the breakout rooms as soon as we've cleared out of this main room. Our speakers for the next round will get started with the presentations. If you're having trouble and you need help getting into a breakout room, you can send a message in the chat and I will be able to put you into the room of your choice. Just put in the chat if you want to go to the depression education or social media, and I can drop you into the correct room. Anybody who is still in the main room, I can drop you into one of the sessions. Just send me a message in the chat and let me know which room you'd like to go into. Anyone else still in the main room who wants me to put you into one of the breakout rooms? I'm happy to do that for you. Just send me a message in the chat and I will get you into the room that you would like to go into. Still a few people in the main room. just let me know.
Hey, Chris, this is Ginger. Can you look at your messages from me? I'm getting some messages from folks of what rooms they want to go into. Thanks.
Okay. All right, I think I've got everyone in, Ginger. Hi, everyone. We are back in the main room. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. Session 3, our final session for tonight, starts at 8:25. You can see on your screen, we have 2 different sessions. You can take a few minutes to read through the descriptions of the sessions to decide which one that you would like to attend. We'd like to strongly encourage you to fill out the evaluation form in the chat for each of the sessions that you are attending. Again, we really appreciate your feedback, and it helps us develop our programming for our next Parent University. Sometime when we get closer to the 8:25 mark, you will see the 2 breakout rooms appear, and you'll be able to choose whichever room you want to go into. If you have trouble choosing the room, we can just use the chat and you can let me know which room you'd like to be in, and I can drop you into the room manually. So take a few minutes for a break, and at 8:25, those breakout rooms will be ready to go. We have about a minute left, and I'll be opening up the breakout rooms for the final sessions this evening at Parent University. If you haven't had a chance to click on the links to fill out evaluations for the sessions you've attended tonight, we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to do that before session 3 starts. when we finish with session 3, you will come back into the main room, and we will be announcing our raffle winners for this evening. So be sure to jump back into the main room at the end of the 3rd session today.
Hi, could you please share the link to the evaluation form? It's no longer in the chat.
Yes, I can do that. I just shared it. All right, I'm going to open up these rooms. If you need help getting into one of the 2 rooms, just hang tight and I will get you in. Okay, it looks like people are saying that they're not seeing the breakout rooms. Let me start dropping people into the breakout rooms. If you can put in the chat what room you'd like to go into. If people want to, moderators want to help. I apologize for the inconvenience.
Hello.
If any of the other moderators want to help here.
How can we best help, Chris?
If you can look at the chat, is there, do you have the
Chris,
ability
we
to
can't see the chat. I don't think there's any way for us to help right now.
Okay, all right. I'm just going to keep plugging away.
Yep, sorry about that. Thank you, Chris. Not sure what our tech issue is.
Yes, I'm not either.
They're directing the messages to you, Chris. That's why.
Okay. I
Okay.
don't know how to change that.
Yeah, let me take a look and see.
Yeah, if you can help me, Ed, that'd be great. My apologies. This is a little bit of a tedious process to do this way. So the easiest way that we might be able to do the people who are left in the room, if you want to unmute yourself and just say your name and let me know where you want to, which room you want to join, I can do it that way. That'll probably be faster.
Abigail, mental health. Thank you.
Got it. Next person.
Hey, Ruth, gender.
Thank you, Ruth. Next.
Hui Lim, mental health.
Thank you. Next.
I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Mental health for me as well, please.
Your name, please.
Nadine Labart or SL.
Okay, mental health.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? I've got a couple people left in the room.
Hey, Chris, this is Mr. Diggs. There was a parent, Abigail, that asked to be put in mental health. So I don't know if you missed that or not, but she seems to still be in the room.
She looks like she's in mental health on my end. It says she hasn't joined it, but she's listed under the mental health group.
Okay.
I'm seeing her. It says her name and then says not joined. There now.
Okay, I think she just
looks like
joined.
it went away. Yeah. Curtis, what room would you like to go in?
I'll take mental health.
Okay. Karen, if you're there, I can put you in a room. Just let me know which one. Sarah and Ty.
I'll take introduction to gender inclusion.
Thanks, Ty. Bye.
All right.
And I've got Sarah and Karen. If you guys want to be assigned to a room, I can let you know. I can get you in one. Allison, if you'd like me to assign you to a room, just let me know which one you'd like to go to. You can either unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat. My apologies, we had some tech issues getting people into this last session. So just let me know, Allison, where you'd like to go.
Oh, I don't know where I'd like to go. I've just seen what's still going on.
Okay, so these are the two sessions on the screen. So whichever one you decide you want to go to, just let me know and I will
Oh,
drop you into
perfect.
that one.
Yes, let's the youth mental health crises, please.
Okay, not a
Thank
problem.
you
I'm
so
going to
much.
drop you in right now.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Are you there, Ed?
Yeah, I'm here. I put
I'm not sure what that was. I don't know why that happened.
Well, you know what? When you open the room to join, it shows everyone in the unassigned room first. They have to scroll down to see the join button. So maybe they weren't scrolling down, but
It was weird. I got a couple messages that said they couldn't see the breakout button.
oh, I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah,
to
I don't know
say.
either.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I
But
guess that
know when you
was,
go to the room, if you don't scroll down to the rooms, you won't see the join button. So
yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
anyway, we got them in. So.
we got them in a little bit late, but we got them in. All right.
Hi, Chris. Janelle Pinder here. I accidentally got knocked out of the youth mental health
Oh,
group.
okay,
Can you put me back in, please?
absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, we want to thank everybody for attending tonight. Please take a few minutes to fill out the chat, the evaluation that you will find in the chat. We would appreciate your input as we do our planning for next year. Before we let you go, we do want to let you know the names of the 10 raffle winners we have. Participants were chosen randomly from the different sessions. You do not have to be present now to win. So if you hear one of your names of one of your neighbors or your friends, you can certainly share that out with them. We'll be contacting you by email. Our prizes for this Parent University and our gift cards for local Oak Park and River Forest businesses. So our winners tonight are Janelle Pinder, Pedro Garcia Alonso, Sylvia Ayuzin, Rudolph Koenig, Sarah Nooner, Tawana Daniels, Curtis Diggs, Annette Nam, Holly Barnes, and Virgilio Castillo. Thank you again for attending tonight. And we hope that we will see you in our spring Parent University. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And thanks for coming.